Hello people, this is Johnny again, and finally with a new tutorial, this time on reverbs. Now, I chose to do one on reverbs because they are very important for mixing, and you shouldn't just go lazily about it, just throwing reverbs all around. You should have a concept on what's actually going on, you should have an idea on how all the parameters actually affect the sound of the reverb and the behavior. And this is also why I chose the Waves Reverb, because it has all the parameters you will find in most reverbs. So I will be going through all of this shebang. I will be showing this on a drum mix, because I believe showing reverbs on drums will give you a pretty good impression on what's going on, because you have a lot of impact sounds, and that is really good to hear how the reverb actually reacts. Then when I'm done with this, I will show you a couple of applications and also some fun applications you can do with reverb. So this will probably end up to be a two-parter tutorial, not sure yet. I'm already talking for quite a bit now without actually doing anything. So let's get started. Here's the drum mix from a new song of our upcoming album Reflection. And it sounds something like this. Before I start off, I took off the reverb on the snare in this drum mix because, well, I think it's kind of obvious, isn't it? I'm making a tutorial on reverb, so I don't want to have extra reverb that's kind of making it all just more complicated. So, anyway, this is what it sounds like without any reverb. Yeah, fun stuff. So let's just put the reverb on here and let's see what happens. Oh my goodness, what's going on there? So as you can hear, there's only reverb right now and no direct sound coming from the actual original recording, or let's say waveform, because this is done with MIDI and not with recording. So, and that's what the wet dry knob is for, or the mix knob. Depending on what reverbs you use, it may be called different, but essentially it does the same thing. Here it's called wet dry. So let's take it out. And we have the original sound again. Let's take some in. So, plain and simple, I guess. No need to go into any details there. Now, what's much more fun, let's go through some different reverb characters. You may have heard about the stuff. There are some called hall and room and chamber. Here's one called church. Others may call it cathedral or cavernous or whatever. Then there's plates, some other fun stuff that I never really use. So yeah, let's check this out. Now this first one is just a hall. Then there's a second hall. And we have room. Chamber. Church. And plate. Plate is a very important reverb. You will probably be using this more than anything else. Or at least, sorry, I use plate reverbs more than anything else. And then there's a second plate in here. Now, let's just stick with the hall, and then I'll go through all those parameters. So, let's see what we have here. Reverb damping. You will probably find this in every reverb, the damping. To understand what the damping does, we first have to go into the time. Well, that's actually pretty simple. The time just tells you how long the reverb will continue. Let's make it really short. Okay. you know, let's make it really long. Yeah. Now the damping, what it does is it controls the timing of the reverb, but in the low end and the high end of the whole frequency range of this reverb. So here we have a ratio. So a ratio of 1 technically means it has the same decay time as our global decay time that we set here. Now we can lower this. First we can pick the frequency range below which it's supposed to act. Let's take, for example, 200 Hertz. So everything below 200 Hertz will be dampened now. And let's go down with the ratio and see what happens. Wait, let's go to a part where it's also really noticeable with a lot of kick drum. Like here. Yeah, and the same goes for the high end. Also controls the decay time compared to our global decay time, well, on the higher frequencies. And this is really important. You can actually get a lot of different vibes with dampening. Let's say, for example, you put the high-end dampening all the way up. If you would use this on vocals, for example, you can get a very ambient sound. You know, have a lot of high-end hiss, whatever you want to call it. And it can sound pretty beautiful. But we'll get all to the applications later on. So yeah, that's dampening. Then what we also still have here is an EQ. And the EQ is actually nothing else than low-pass filter and high-pass filter, or shelf filters, depending on what you have. So if the reverb you're using doesn't have an EQ in it, you know, many reverbs don't have all the features that a reverb could have. And you might have one that doesn't have an EQ. So simple thing, you just put an EQ behind the reverb and then you have the same thing. Well, technically, if you would put a reverb as insert effect and have like the wet dry mix somewhere around here, and then you would put an EQ afterwards, then you would also be EQing your direct sound. But when you have an internal EQ, it really only acts on the reverb and not on the direct sound. Anyway, let's see what it does. Big shock. It just takes out some frequencies. And now, depending on what you need to do or what you want to do, you kind of have to play around with the EQ and the dampening to get this feel that you want, because using one over the other is not the same as using the other over the one. For example, having the EQ up here is not the same as putting it down and raising the dampening. So again, depending on what you need to do, what you want to do, you really need to play around with those parameters.